We're going to go to Adam Kramer, Bleacher Report, National College Football Analyst. Adam, I hope you had an awesome weekend, man. Welcome back to the game in T-Town.
I did, man. Hope you did as well, and good to talk to you again.
Absolutely, man. Just, ready to talk some more college football, but I know you're always cooking up on the grill, man. Did you have some good food this weekend on the grill?
Oh, man, I did. I went to go see my dad, who's in Wisconsin, and he's dry aging his own steaks now. So we did it right. Yeah, it was great, and all sorts of good stuff. And
how do you do that,
food.
Adam? Like, how do you dry age your own steak? I know they do it in restaurants, but how do you do it in a?
They sell like these homemade kits, and I won't even pretend to butcher the science behind it. But I know this. He's like doing it, and he likes it so much that he's already graduated to like a more substantial kit. That man loves his meat, and I'm just there to to freeload, quite honestly. But man, it was so good. I mean, just a lot of good meat and good weather, and it's been madness in a lot of places. It was good to just kind of unwind a little bit, and we had a really good time.
Adam, we're getting college football back in the SEC with practice on campus June the 8th. Do you think they did the right thing?
Yeah, I do, and that's not an easy answer, and I know it's not an easy question either. It's I think based off of the information that people have, and just based off of everything you can try to acquire from this, it feels like it's right. And I think the important thing about this is beyond that football is being back, that they believe that they have the safeguards in place, right? So everything you read, the numbers, you can look at this situation and find numbers that either help or hurt whatever argument you want to make about this. But based off of everything that I've read or try to read, it feels like this is an appropriate thing to do. And my goodness, in terms of the players, this is a group of some of the healthiest human beings on the planet, right? So in terms of that, and I hate to say something so callously, that's part of this reality. So I think it is the right thing. I think it is time to do some of this stuff. And Ryan, you know this, that if you're going to have a season, it needs to start right now. Right, I think that's the important thing. There is a huge urgency. People will look and say, "Well, we're not playing games till late August, early September." These guys have not gotten the same conditioning they normally will. The off season has been completely reshifted. Their bodies are not in the places that they normally would be. It's a big deal that they get back sooner than later if you're going to continue with the season, which at this point, at least from a playing game standpoint, it looks like we're going to do.
Adam, when you look at 102 days away from Alabama football against USC, when you look at the struggles of this lack of 15 days, there were some places like Clemson, I think they got in 10 out of the 15, so they're much further ahead than everybody else. But some of the places like Alabama didn't even get started. We're 2 hours prior to practice, and it gets canceled, right? I mean, it gets pushed back. So I back up a couple of minutes. Who do you think this will hurt the most out of all around college football? And just maybe not team by team, but just when you look at college football, who hurts the most by missing all this time?
It's another great question. I think certainly if you had a coaching change, and we know how prevalent this is, and I'm not just talking about head coaches, but if you brought in an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator this year, in some cases, like you look at a Baylor, where it's like, you bring in a Dave Aranda, you try to redo it. It's really difficult, right? I think if you had a coaching change, first and foremost, or a new system that you're trying to implement, brutal. And I know you can do things over Zoom, and you can try to minimize this. I just think generally philosophy, cohesion, things that kind of are naturally acquired over an off season, I think are going to be really behind the eight ball here. I think if you have a depth chart full, I'll look at like in Alabama, I'll look at Clemson, I'll look at Ohio State. Okay, these are teams that are basically well-oiled machines at this point, right? Clemson has their quarterback. Alabama has its quarterback or quarterbacks and just an assembly line of talent. You've lost a lot of people. So has Clemson. So has Ohio State. And yet still, the depth is there. The gifts are there. The coaches are there. Like foundationally, these teams are built to withstand a lot of this. I think, again, in places where depth is an issue, and you start to get into those situations, that's going to be a problem. I think you're going to really see like great coaches shine during this, because it is going to be a little chaotic at first, but by August I think this will be pretty natural for a lot of teams. But man, I feel for coaches taking over new programs and then you go into this. That's not going to be easy at all when you're trying to implement your system on the fly with like a month to go before a game. It's probably I think ultimately the results will be impacted by it.
So when we look at this college football season, we've had a lot of offensive guys and defensive guys, and we feature a quarterback every week, John Parker Wilson, coming up at 5 o'clock. And, he was one of the first that kind of pointed this out. And he said he thinks a lot of the offense is going to be simplified. He just says, I don't think you can be as complex. And I guess that favors these Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, the normal. You got talent, it takes over.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's it. I mean, if you have a Justin Fields or a Trevor Lawrence, and I know, Alabama may not have that guy, but Matt got reps, right? Like, I mean, if that's the guy, you feel pretty good about that. You feel pretty good about the talent you have. Like everything else, when it comes to the financials of this, who would be impacted, and everybody's going to be impacted by this, no matter what. But I think when you've got these foundations built, it's hugely important. I think you're right. The part I do worry about is, injuries. I worry about that all the time because I hate to see anybody get hurt. But how is that going to be impacted? Look, if guys are starting to come back, a week from today and get on campus and do these things, you hope that will help alleviate some of those concerns, right? So I think ultimately you're right, though, that the rich football teams, the Alabamas of the world, going to stay that way. The gap to me does not shrink in the instance, I guess is the best way to put it, right? Alabama being out, like all of a sudden the gap between an Alabama and a South Carolina or a Vanderbilt, for lack of it, I don't think that gap gets smaller in this. If anything, I think it gets a lot wider.
How do you dethrone the Trevor Lawrence, and I know LSU won the national title, but it just feels like going into this season in my mindset that Clemson's the team to beat in college football. I know Alabama will be right there, and I think they've got a chance if they really get things going. But I don't know if I trust them to depend on their strength. I've watched Sark a couple times. I like him as the OC, but sometimes I just don't feel that that he's going to rely on this offensive line of this rushing attack. I feel like that the championship kind of goes through Clemson a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe Ohio State too, potentially. But I think Clemson is where you have to start because of Lawrence, because of Ross, because of ETN coming back pretty shockingly. I think the way you do it, cliche, old school, but where Alabama kind of sort of lost itself at times last year was defensively, right? And that's no surprise. Youth, injuries. I'm not necessarily saying that as a knock. It's just sort of the reality of the season that unfolded. When you lose, maybe the best linebacker in the country before the season starts, and you're already playing, 4, 5, 6 true freshmen in the lineup at once at points early on in the year, that's an area that if you're Alabama, you have to step up. Or what you do is you counter it with an equally unbelievably gifted quarterback in offense, which is what LSU did, right? I mean, it was like a concoction of things where LSU just was full steamroll ahead. I don't necessarily look at Clemson. I don't look at anyone this year and get like unbeatable vibes, right? I don't have that mentality with Clemson. They're going to be great. Lawrence is great. He's got these amazing weapons, but they've lost some pieces too. And I think the way you do counter that is you say we're going to have just like this total team output. And I think that was the difference with Alabama, which was flipped last year. It's kind of counter to the Saban culture of just being this, vice grip that just squeezes the life out of you. Last year, it was overpower you with offense, even through injuries at quarterback. And I think ultimately, if you find that kind of balance, that's how you beat Clemson. That was LSU didn't have a great defense for much of the year, and then really did seem to kind of find itself at the end. And when you have Burrow, and then you topple it on with a defense that all of a sudden can find stops. I mean, that's, there's no beating that. If Alabama does that or whomever does that is going to win the title.
Adam, when we look at college football, we're actually, because we come down every year and cover the SEC spring meetings. I mean, it's a great excuse to get out of the office, get out of the studio, and come to the beach. I mean, that's number one. I mean, we're set up literally right on. I mean, so we have a partnership, and they canceled. So we decided just to come on down, and we've been, instead of letting the ADs and the presidents make calls, what we're doing is we're letting fans call in today and tell us what they want to do and improve college football. And I'm not sure if you've heard about it. We'll see if we can get it passed. But we've kicked Auburn and Missouri out of the SEC. We just don't think they belong.
That's a start, huh? Like that's the baseline of me entering the fold here. Just I would kind of agree on the Missouri part. Gone. So is that your favorite answer? Like, what have been some of the other ones? Have you gotten any that you like are actually adaptable?
Yeah, and really they've talked a lot about targeting calls.
That's where my mind went.
Yeah, that was where pretty much, like today, it's probably 60% targeting. We just can't stand that rule, and I'm glad college football is going to do that, to delete the walk of shame, to delete the actual player getting the call and then having to walk to the locker room. That's a good thing. They've removed that. That's good. But I still think, man, that rule has so much hindrance on the aggressiveness of the defensive side of the football.
Well, I've screamed this from the rooftops for years. I've talked to people about it. In fact, I think it was Big Ten Media Days, probably 5-6 years ago, that Pat Fitzgerald really kind of ignited this thing, and I wrote about it, and it started to get some steam. I've talked to Shaw about it in the SEC offices, which is sort of the yellow card and red card philosophy. When you watch it targeting, okay, most of the overwhelming majority of targeting calls these days are not egregious calls. I don't have data currently to support that, and it would be a hard thing to support. But when you watch, they're generally pretty iffy. There are some calls in targeting that say, ooh, all right, that is a violent play. We don't want that in. Let's go. But if you could label these, like you do in basketball, flagrant 1, flagrant 2, like you do in soccer, yellow and red card, like this call and this ruling requires nuance. And to remove someone from the game without a full capacity and the ability to state just how egregious it was, look at college football's own rule with the punter. You're trying to protect the punter. Okay, you've got 2 levels of penalties to call it, running into and roughing. Right? Just do the same thing with targeting. So you have a targeting call on whomever that hits somebody. Okay, this is sort of targeting. We're going to penalize you 10 yards instead, but you get to stay in the game. You got to miss a play. You got to sit out the next play, but you're not gone from the game. And oh, by the way, since you had one of these calls, if you get another one in the game, then you're gone. Maybe if you get another one the following week, it carries over, right? This is not hard, and I think it's fair. I agree with what the philosophy behind the targeting calls. I agree with what they stand for. I'm all for making the game safer, but you have to do it with some nuance. These are really complicated, high-moving, fast, violent situations. You can't just put it under one umbrella, in my opinion. I'd love to see that change, and I honestly think people would really welcome it.
Well, Adam, we've had defensive guys on and been former players, and they're talking about they don't even feel like that they can actually make a hard hit. I mean, think about you go back to Reuben Foster hitting Leonard Fournette. I mean, those were tone-setting moments of the game. Sometimes you lay the lumber, and it's like, okay, hey, you know what? A running back or wide receiver is not going to run his nose up in this area because if he comes this side of the football, he's going to get hit. They think that it's changed the game so much from a mentality point because it's almost unpredictable what they're truly going to call targeting. And I just think that we could do a better job of maybe adjusting that.
I'm totally with you. And the other thing that's frustrating is when you do see a big hit in the game, oftentimes you see a flag just fly because it's, that feels like the right thing to do. I like the fact that the officials basically made it that, hey, if a flag isn't thrown, we can still call it in the booth. That may seem like a small change, but it's huge. It's saying, hey, don't just throw a flag to throw it, right? If it's a fast play and you don't see it, we're going to protect you in the booth. We'll look at replays, and we can stop the game. Like, that's a good change. But football at its core is violent, and football at its core should be violent. It doesn't mean you have to hit people in the head, right? Exactly. There's a level of violence that we should tolerate and that we should expect. And I think trying to find that is really difficult to do. I think they're getting better at it, but targeting is really frustrating to me because I think providing some nuance, providing different levels, the way it's called, the way it's flagged, the way it's explained, really confusing, right? Really confusing. That's the other part of this rule that I don't think they've done a great job on, is what does and does not constitute targeting. It's sort of like what is and what isn't a catch in the NFL. We have our own version of that, and it's a bit of a mess.
Adam, what you working on, man? Anything that we should keep our eye on? I mean, anything coming down the pipe?
Yeah, I got a couple of really fun recruiting stories I'm working on. You know, one of them. Or recruiting type stories, and really it's been interesting. I like to travel all over the place and tell my stories, and obviously we're not there yet. I can't travel yet, but I am kind of bracing for that. And look, I can tell you the mentality from Bleacher Report, and we pride ourselves in really being a premier spot for leadoff. Is like we want our coverage to be bigger than it ever has. And if that means doing some calls through Zoom for a little bit, fine, but I'm getting ready to go out to places. I'm getting ready to figure out where I want to go. I can't wait. I really miss it. This is one of my favorite times of year to get access, and to not have it just has been a bit of a bummer. So, man, back on the road, all sorts of stuff. But in the meantime, we'll keep coming up with ideas.
Hey, Adam Kramer, connect with him. Kegs and Eggs on the Twitter account, BleacherReport.com. Adam, thank you again for being a part of the show, man. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.